Hey everyone, welcome back. So today's video is going to be something a little bit different from what I normally do on the channel. So instead of the normal kind of discussions about the nuances of using psychedelics or understanding therapy or personal development, I thought it might be interesting to kind of zoom out and give you a big picture from my own experience, my own point of view on my own life and on other people's lives I've seen who have taken psychedelics over a long period of time and the kind of patterns of phases that people tend to go through as they're using psychedelics. So, whether you're someone who's new to psychedelics and considering taking them as an ongoing part of your life path, whether you're someone who's been using them for a while, maybe you'll see some sort of clarity or reflection in your own experience here, or, whether you're just curious about psychedelics and curious about how that experience is over time, how the relationship to psychedelics changes, what kind of insights and experiences you go through, or perhaps you're curious about why certain people in the psychedelic community, like old hippies and whatnot, act or seem a certain way to you. This may be of interest to you. So, again, something a little different, but I think you guys will really enjoy this one. So let's get into it. And just really briefly, before we go ahead and get into the main content here, there's going to be a lot to talk about. Let me just be honest, I'm not great at promoting the channel. I'm not a strong self-promoter. I'm not a big marketing person. I'm much more of a humanistic person. So if you're new to the channel, please consider, subscribing if you like this kind of content. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Let the algorithm know to spread it to other people. And if something here sparks a thought for you, please do consider leaving a comment down below. I really do value interaction with the audience and conversation back and forth. So if you have something to say about anything I say here, I'd love to hear about it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this. So let me just create a little context here and create a bit of an understanding of where this information is coming from so that we're clear up front. So I want to be intellectually honest with you here and just say that, this is purely anecdotal information, okay? So what I'm about to share here is very much based on my own life experience. I'll be sharing some very personal stuff here and also based on kind of my somewhat unique, not super unique, but somewhat unique position of being in a community of a lot of other people who use psychedelics over a long period of time. So for those of you who perhaps don't know, I've been using psychedelics for over 30 years now, since the early 90s. And I was involved in a lot of different music and kind of countercultural things along the way, where large groups of people who use psychedelics tend to gather, and that ended up being a lot of my friend group for most of my adult life. So this would include the Grateful Dead scene and the Fish scene. This would include the rave scene, the Burning Man scene, the New Age scene, the yoga scene, the healer scene, what have you. I've been around a lot of people who use psychedelics in a similar way, somewhat recreationally, but also perhaps somewhat therapeutically, for healing, for personal growth, ceremonially, ayahuasca communities, et cetera, right? And so I've known a lot of people who take psychedelics, is kind of the TLDR on that. And that affords me the ability to kind of reflect and look and start to see patterns, with my own experience and see patterns that other people have experienced and start to kind of look at what might be common amongst different people. Yes, this is anecdotal. Yes, this is observational. Yes, this is just out of my brain. So let's be clear that this is just my view. This is just my kind of way of trying to articulate patterns that I see. There's no empirical data to back this up as a truth or a truism. You may relate to it, you may not. But I think it's useful, especially for people who are perhaps newer to psychedelics and, wanting to use them in a healthy way. I think it's important to know some of the different ways that your relationship to psychedelics will change. And so definitely seem to be, let's say, certain phases or certain stages that people tend to progress through with psychedelics, okay? Some of them are very clearly identifiable. Some of them are perhaps a little less common. I don't know how far this progression goes, if there's an end phase that people kind of arrive at or if it just keeps changing. And I don't want to be prescriptive and say this is always true or that this is always linear, that you always go through the same progression. I do think it's possible for people to kind of jump from one phase to a different phase and perhaps skip phases in between or then come back around to them later. So it may not always be linear, but there's kind of roughly, let's say, a bit of a progression between these phases that often goes down this certain set of experiences that I've seen over and over. So I want to share that with you. And really, this is for everyone, but especially if you're someone who's new to psychedelics and curious about them, excited about them, you're in that kind of passionate, like, discovery moment with them where you're like, yeah, this is amazing. This is my jam. I want to do more of this. And you're compelled by them. I certainly was when I was young. And I want you to kind of perhaps get a sense of, well, where does this go? What's the bigger picture here? What does this open up for me over time? And there are definitely going to be some kind of warnings and caveats, some pitfalls along the way. And there are definitely also some really beautiful phases. So let's just get into it and I'll start explaining it to you. By the way, I forgot to mention, last week I actually filmed a version of this video and had, put it all together and, even put it out on the channel. So some of you might have seen this. It was out for like 20 minutes and some of you might have clicked on it and then I, deleted it. But basically that version of the video, there were no transitions between any of the segments. It probably watches very awkwardly. Although I did a good job explaining the ideas, I did a terrible job editing because I was just completely mindless about that. So this is my second attempt at articulating this. Okay, with that being said and out of the way, let's go ahead and get into it. So the first phase here that I see people go through is what you could think of as like a conditioning phase, or a deconditioning phase rather. So often, as we first start getting into our relationship with psychedelics, the first phase we go through is a period of becoming self-aware of what is authentically our truth inside of us and what is perhaps thoughts, feelings, beliefs, perceptions, opinions, worldviews that aren't authentically ours currently, right? So these might be things we used to believe but no longer do. These might be things that have been programmed into us through social conditioning or through our upbringing, through education, through our family systems, through media, of course, and the internet and social media in this day and age, which is a huge conditioning force. So we have all these inputs of things that are putting ideas and beliefs and perceptions and value systems into us along the way that we don't have a whole lot of choice of as we're kind of growing up and developing. And then lo and behold, you eat the mushroom or you take the LSD and you start to become self-aware and you start to sense the distance, the layers between your felt, embodied, lived truth of how you feel and what matters to you and what's real to you and what's meaningful to you and what kind of seems like bullshit, right? So there are a lot of different ways that this can go, but we can kind of think of it as this falling away of artifice or inauthenticity or falseness or conditioning in our life, right? Now, often this looks like rebellion, right? Often this looks like, rejecting perhaps the religion we were raised with or rejecting the cultural values we were raised with. Maybe we were raised in a really strict family, but we actually really value, free self-expression, for example, or the other way around. Maybe we were raised in a really liberal, self-expressive family, but we really value being kind of on point and much more controlled and composed, right? This is often where we start to look at, the way society's structured and, call that into question and, look at capitalism and look at materialism and look at the right? And so this is often where you see people kind of at first just kind of, they get a little destabilized, perhaps a little like rattled and like, well, what's real and what's true and what's meaningful? And this is also where we start to see people get a bit rebellious, right? So these younger parts of us that maybe weren't allowed to come out when we were, children being raised or in school or what have you, maybe want to start to come out and come online. So this is where you get the rebellious hippies who, down with the capitalism, and they become really radical and political. Or this is where you get people who get really kind of sexually liberal after taking a bunch of psychedelics and become kind of free-spirited in that way. Or this is where you get, people just being kind of anti-authoritarian and pushing back and being rebellious and, reactive and, assertive of autonomy and independence and oneself, right? And so there's a lot that happens in this phase. And this is, for some people, as far as their relationship to psychedelics ever go. They look at psychedelics as a deconditioning agent to get them in touch with their personal truth. They see it as a tool to see through the bullshit, see through the lies of society and others around them, and, false constructs. And that's really the relationship that psychedelics has for people. But this is just a phase. This can be both liberating and jarring. I had a client once who, God bless her, I don't know if she's watching or not. If you are, I think about you a lot. She was midlife. She was finally coming around to psychedelics, probably, I forget her age, but I want to say 50s, maybe even 60s. And she, took mushrooms for the first time, then reported back to me, and she was so shocked at how much of her thinking and her sense of self and her beliefs just felt fake, just felt like bullshit, right? Now, I think that what's useful in this phase is to go through a process of sifting through your own beliefs, your own values, and owning what you really agree with and what is really true for you, right? So as a classic example of psychedelics, let's say you start to realize the emptiness and the hollowness of materialism, and you think it's kind of bullshit, and you think that consumerism and capitalism are bullshit, and you start to, challenge that. You start to see the problem with that, right? Maybe you don't think it's bullshit, but you start to see the problems with that, right? Now, if you, after sifting through that, you come back around and you're like, no, actually, I really believe in materialism, I really believe in capitalism, then fair enough. Then that becomes your own authentic value system, right? But if you start to see that and you go, actually, this is toxic and it doesn't leave me fulfilled, and it was just something I was taught to believe in, but it's not really my heart of hearts, then perhaps it's something to discard, right? So we should be going through a process of really sifting through, but owning. What we don't want to do is just dissociate and throw out all our value systems and essentially become nihilistic, where we're just like, nothing matters, it's all fake, it's all bullshit, I don't care about anything. If that's the case, if you find yourself there's a really good chance I would be looking at some childhood wounds. I'd be looking at, is there a deeper filter there that you're thinking through, which is, contrarian to everything because something wounded you, wounded what you cared about when you're younger, right? But assuming those wounds aren't there, this is kind of this phase we want to go through, sifting through and clarifying what our true values system really is, what we really care about, what's actually meaningful to us, what we really believe in, what we see as exciting and profound and good and beautiful and worth time and energy and celebration in life, right? So that's this first period of kind of deconditioning and kind of this falling away of what is false. Okay, from there, what tends to happen and what often kind of overlaps with that. So there could be a phase of deconditioning, then we kind of move into an overlapping phase here of this next thing, and then we move into it more, is this phase of experiences, right? So direct experiencing or awakening or discovering kind of this deeper energetic layer of experience of reality. So you could think of this as, the deeper layers of the mind. You could think of this as having spiritual experiences and spiritual awakenings and spiritual discoveries. You could think of this as just these kind of psychophysical direct experiences of states and experiences, raw experience that is, transcendent, hard to put into words, deep, profound, fascinating, strange, beautiful, interesting. And this is often where we start to really discover kind of this wider array of capabilities of our own nervous system to access different mindsets, ways of thinking, different emotion sets, different states, different meanings, different perceptual vantage points. And we start to really deepen our own sense of self, our own sense of cosmos, right? Our own sense of kind of the more meaningful layers of subjective experience than just hard physical material reality, right? So this is a pivot into the subjective, into the meaning, into the felt, into, for a lot of people, this kind of parallels with an awareness that everything is made up of energy, right? That everything is vibrational and energetic. And, of course, the more rationalists among you may, say that that's just a delusion and false and subjective and not real. Fair enough. I'm agnostic about that at this point. Who knows if that's true or if that isn't, but it's very much a common kind of epiphany that goes with this stage. This is often where people tend to get from reflecting on themselves to having mystical experiences, transcending the self, moving into wholeness, into cosmos, into connection perhaps with nature as a greater whole, right? This is often where people get really more clear about spirituality and spiritual themes and what spirituality means to them and their own direct relationship to the spiritual layer of experience, right? This is often where, a lot of the Ram Dass material, the Alan Watts material, the Terence McKenna material, that kind of stuff starts to hit home more. And it's not just like, oh, that's interesting, or oh, that's funny, or oh, that's kind of relatable, but it starts to be like, oh, wow, I get it. There's this whole other layer to life and to reality, and it's filled with beauty and meaning and experiences and truths and vantage points and nuances and complexity, and it's always changing, and it's rich with, life force. And that's where, we start to encounter this kind of a thing, right? And that can go on, again, for a long time. And, like I was saying in the last phase, this phase is one where a lot of people just end up here with their psychedelic experiences, and they just park here. This is as far as it goes, right? And they're just kind of like grooving with this, right? And they're curious, and they're kind of, this is the psychonaut phase. This is the exploring the psyche, exploring the cosmos, exploring experience, right? I think this is an incredibly beautiful phase where a lot of people end up discovering a lot of things that end up leaving them challenged, really strange truths and questions and deep, profound paradoxes start to emerge. But, also where we start to discover profound resource states, senses of peace, senses of well-being, senses of universal love and compassion and connectedness and beauty and exquisite, poetry to life, right? So this is where a lot of that starts to come online, as we go deeper from deconditioning to what's here, so to speak, right? So that's the second phase. So the next phase that seems to come out of this experiencing phase for a lot of people is a phase of what I think of as kind of different flavors of zealotry. Now, zealotry can, what zealotry means for anyone who's not familiar with the word is like a firmness, a rigidity, a certainty of belief, right? So when we get passionately like, this is how it is, that's being a zealot, and zealotry in the psychedelic world can obviously take a lot of different flavors and forms because human beings are complex and unique and diverse and different, and there are kind of different ways that can show up. Obviously, in the previous phase of awakening and experiencing, a lot of people have spiritual experiences and spiritual awakenings, and then that turns into perhaps more serious spiritual practice, And then as they get more serious about their spiritual practices, this is where they become kind of zealots about spiritual stuff. So this is where you see people, get real serious about ayahuasca work. This is where you see people get real serious about strict meditation practices or, strict, dietas or cleanses or all that kind of stuff, right? People get like really rigidly spiritual. This is also where people get kind of dogmatic about psychedelics being a spiritual tool. This is what they're for. This is how they should be. They're only supposed to be used in a sacred way. They are important medicines, and they're not to be disrespected and not to be abused and not to be used recreationally. They're really for deep spiritual exploration, right? This is where you get people who get really hardcore about whatever their beliefs are, right? But also, this is where you get the opposite. You get the polarization of that, right? So you get people who are kind of zealots about, psychedelics being, all that stuff is bullshit. All the spiritual stuff is just in your head. It's in your imagination. It's not totally real. All those maps and layers of reality and things you've experienced are just projections of your own mind and things you've read and conditioning you've taken in. And really, psychedelics are just, fun, empty, meaningless. They're just, recreational toys, basically. They're just a fun, weird thing to make your brain go burr in a weird way. And people get zealous about that too, that all this other stuff is bullshit. It's all fake. It's not real. I never had that kind of experience. I don't know what you're talking about. And they get, kind of zealous about, it doesn't mean anything. It's, the kind of the Rick and Morty version of psychedelics where the universe is empty and meaningless and nothing means anything. And this is all just your synapses firing in weird ways, right? And there's can be a certainty around that, right? And obviously these kind of two camps, these are kind of very common ways that people go, polarize each other, right? And part of my intention here on the channel with the term integrative for integrative psychonautics isn't just about psychedelic integration, but about integrating this whole spectrum of views around using these medicines, right? So, these folks can really kind of square off, and what they don't see is that they're sharing a common kind of phase of development, which is this kind of zealotry and rigidity, right? And so this can last a while. And like I just said with the other previous stages or phases, this phase too, people can kind of end up parking here, and a lot of times it's like we go through an early discovery phase of psychedelics and we're very open and we're discovering and we're open. And then once we feel like we've seen enough of that, we start to make up our mind about it and congeal and get certain, right? Now, there are a lot of interesting questions about certainty inside of psychedelics, like how much of that is confirmation bias? How much of the types of experiences we have are formatted by unconscious taboos of places we're not willing to go inside ourselves? How much of that is about us confusing certain maps that we've been taught, by spiritual teachers, for example, versus direct experience, right? How much of that is intellectual dishonesty? How much of that is emotional projection? How much of that is based in old attachment wounds that we're projecting onto our experience of the medicine, or that is shaping or filtering the kinds of experiences we have on the medicine? This is all stuff that usually the zealot isn't thinking about. They're so caught in their paradigm of thinking. They're not thinking, what are the boundaries of this paradigm, or how might this paradigm be bullshit itself, right? So people get stuck here. And people, it's weird. It's a weird thing to watch. And I'm sure you've seen that kind of rigid hippie, right? Like it seems like a paradox in and of itself. Aren't hippies supposed to be open-minded and flexible and really able to entertain different ideas and be really welcoming to different ways of thinking? In theory, yes. But in reality, what happens a lot is that once people have kind of danced through the unknown for a phase of their life, they kind of step into wanting to be certain, right? And so you see a lot of this, whether it's old hippies who are really rigid about their beliefs, or you see this, with, academics who are using psychedelics who are certain that psychedelics are just doing this one very physical thing and your synapses in this particular way, and that's all it is, to everything in between. But the point I want you to take from all this is a phase, right? And if you keep going, it does change, it does move, but this is often a phase that people go through. Okay, so what happens after zealotry then, right? For a lot of people, that's kind of the end of the line. That's as far as they get. A lot of people get stuck there, which is just kind of the nature of being entrenched in certainty. A lot of times we take comfort, we take stability from certainty, and we want to hold on to that, and that can end up just kind of entrenching us, right? But what happens if you're able to grow past zealotry, right? So what I see happens after zealotry is often kind of a phase where people relax about their zealous, beliefs, and they move into a bit more of a holding it in a, well, this seems to be true, but it may not be, I don't know. And it becomes much more about working the path, kind of getting in a groove of working the path with the medicine. And it becomes less about what is real, what is true, what is truth, this is how it is. It becomes much more about, it doesn't matter, if other people agree with this or not. My relationship with this works for me, and I'm going to work it and lean into it and just kind of enjoy it. And this is often where a lot of great growth and spiritual progress and insight happens, because you let go of kind of the relational undercurrent that the zealot has, and you get into it's just you and the medicine working your path, right? This is a really beautiful place to be. This is really nice. Things relax. You're familiar with the medicine by this point. You're familiar with these different types of experiences you can have and what those might mean to you. You've worked through any perhaps rigidity you have around the meaning of those experiences to you, and you just get into perhaps a little more of a curious, engaged, appreciative, relaxed, flowing kind of rhythm with using the medicine. This is a great place to end up, and I think can be really rewarding, and there can be a lot of insight and a lot of progress that perhaps you're not having in these earlier phases, and that can just kind of stretch out onward, right? But unfortunately, what I find is that people are in this, stasis, working it, kind of groove mode for a while, and then something tends to happen, perhaps because the experiences aren't always so fulfilling or aren't always so easy, or life starts to happen outside of your relationship to psychedelics, and that colors your understanding or calls into question your understanding. And then there's kind of a fork in the road. So I want to kind of explain this fork in the road here and what those two forks are, and we'll kind of go further on from here. So next, what I often see is kind of a fork in the road that people seem to kind of go one way or the other. Now, the two ways that I see this go are often that people either kind of bump into and deal with some sort of obstacle in life that often takes them away from their relationship to psychedelics, or they become disillusioned. They start to lose the faith, so to speak, or lose the optimism, lose the excitement, the hope, and become a bit kind of jaded, cynical, this kind of a thing. And I'd love to explain both of those in a little more detail here. So let's just talk about it briefly, and then we'll get to what can happen after that. So the obstacle. So like I was just saying, in that fork in the road moment, I see people generally tend to start to deal with, the external realities of the difficulty of life, right? So I would say on average, this isn't always the case, but a lot of people, especially the ones I've known, started taking psychedelics when they were younger, perhaps in their teens or 20s, seems to be typical. And, a lot of these phases that I've been describing along the way so far generally tend to take you through your 20s and perhaps into your 30s somewhere, right? Perhaps even older, perhaps even into your 40s. But somewhere along that kind of arc of growing up and maturing, life is life. So it's going to get in the way. And that means it's going to bring challenges, difficulties, and heavy moments. that really impact our relationship with psychedelics, right? So with the obstacle, what I see happens is that usually there's some sort of an event, whether that is perhaps taking a new job, whether that's moving to a new country, whether that's a parent getting ill or passing away, whether that is one's own health scare, getting in the way, whether that's perhaps even just like a developmental need that's not being met by psychedelics to get your shit together and grow up and mature and, get real and get, practical. Something like this happens where there's some sort of an obstacle, whether it's kind of an internal obstacle or a life event obstacle that really gets in our way of it making sense to continue doing psychedelics, perhaps as often as we were doing it or as intensely as we were doing it. And it starts to seem like this is, spiritual bypassing, this is recreation, this is counter to my need to be practical and physical and solid and engaged and on point, right? And so for a lot of people, this obstacle is really a moment where they end up putting psychedelics down altogether, quitting them altogether, giving them up altogether. Some of these people, of course, pivot and become religious or change their way of life completely. Or they just stop and they're like, it doesn't fit in my life. I'm becoming a parent. I have kids now, or, what have you. I have a career now that's demanding all my time and energy, what have you. And so the obstacle often is the end of the road for people with their experience with psychedelics, or at least the major tapering off. And it maybe occasionally, once every 4 or 5 years, they, have a little psychedelic experience or something like that. The obstacle can be really painful because it's this pivot from all of these amazing, beautiful resources and experiences and insights and just deep exploration of your own mind and your own emotions and the wisdom and the profundity of life to have to put all that away. I have to let go of all of that. And I think there's a powerful life lesson in that of being bigger than your attachment to these states and these experiences, really inviting you to integrate the wisdom from those experiences into something practical that you can apply in your life and kind of demonstrate what you've learned through your actions, through, what you do in the world, right? So often the obstacle, there's kind of a hidden blessing in that of really integrating and really getting real with, what it is that you discovered on psychedelics. But it's not easy. It's often really sad, really confusing, really challenging, really disappointing. And like I said, often the end of the relationship for people with psychedelics. So that's the obstacle. And like I said before, the other way that this goes is disillusionment. So another thing that you often see, and this is kind of, I think, where the cliche of the jaded hippie that's kind of like pessimistic and sarcastic and negative, that, that used to be so utopian, starts to come in. I think this is another form of what happens when, the hard reality of some of the darker, more challenging, more material, physical challenges of life start to come in for someone who's kind of been on this deep exploration of the subjective and this kind of exploration of the self. And really what can start to happen is that we start to question all of the things that, were beautiful or inspiring or positive about our psychedelic experiences. We start to think it's all bullshit. We start to, think it's all fake or not real or irrelevant anyways, because no one's going to wake up and no one's going to, understand anyways. Or we start to just get kind of, or we feel like dissatisfied because perhaps we've been neglecting our material life, our material well-being. Perhaps we've been too content to kind of be this blissful psychonaut, exploring the internal, making enough money to get by, but not really thriving. And we kind of hit a point where we're like, screw all that. This is all bullshit. And we get pessimistic, we get reactive and negative towards psychedelics as if, all the things that we experienced weren't valid, real, or true, right? And this phase of disillusionment, can really, I think this is often, when I think of this, I also think of like the way 60s hippies turned into 80s yuppies, right? There's often a pivot towards the materialistic, towards the shallow, towards the basic, towards the, the physical, and a bit of a dismissal of all of the profound, nuanced beauty that can come with psychedelics, right? And so this is also very painful. And I think for a lot of people, this lack of integration between these profound experiences we've been having and our material, physical life, and meeting the harder edges and the harder densities of reality with honesty and with courage and with truthfulness, this is where they really start to clash if we haven't been doing our work, right? And so often these are people who there's a little bit of a flavor of spiritual bypassing that's been going on with it, or a lot that's been going on for their relationship for years, or decades even. This is often where psychedelics have only taken them so far, and so they just kind of throw up their hands in the air and they're like, well, it's all bullshit, and they give up because that was their only hope, that was their only resource. And so there's this disillusionment that can happen, and it's dark. It's a really weird, dark place that people get into with this, where they kind of stop caring about everything. It's really kind of a flavor, from my point of view, of the disappointment, the wounding of our value system that can end up leading to like a form of dissociation or from what we care about, or a form of perhaps even disappointment that could lead to a flavor of depression, really. And so this is the other way that it often goes. So basically, at that fork in the road moment, life gets hard. Reality comes in, difficult, challenging, heavy experiences come in. And either we're met with an obstacle and we put it down, or we get disillusioned and we get bitter and we kind of, get dismissive of things and kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. And then ride that out as if that's true, or as if that's more real about reality, right? And so this is the other way it goes. And a lot of people, like I have said with a lot of these other phrases, get stuck here. They park here, and that's their relationship to psychedelics now is, oh yeah, I used to be really into them, but it's all fake and it's all bullshit. And, now I'm just, kind of a blasé, dissatisfied, ex-optimist who's unhappy with the world and doesn't know what to do with that. So that's kind of the disillusionment phase. But there is a phase that can happen on the other side of either of these forks in the road that I want to discuss with you. Okay, and the final phase that I want to describe here for you is a phase of reclaiming or deepening your relationship with psychedelics. So for some people, after an obstacle phase or a disillusionment phase, things start to settle down, things start to open up, or they start to realize that perhaps they were being a bit reactive, a bit emotional, a bit biased in their relationship to psychedelics, or perhaps they just start to miss them and miss those experiences, because typically for a lot of people, psychedelic experiences are among the most meaningful, profound, kind of peak experiences of our life. So to have access to peak experiences and then to lose access to that, sooner or later, you're going to start reminiscing and going, gosh, that was really cool. That was really beautiful. It was such a good time in my life, right? And so what this often turns into is a re-picking up of relationship to the medicine. That's often deeper, humbler, more patient, more appreciative of the limits of psychedelics, of what they don't do and what they do, and is much more filled with gratitude and respect for the medicine than perhaps some of our earlier experiences. So this is often where you see people putting them in the right place in their life, not overusing them, not projecting too much expectation onto them, not using them as a form of escape, not using them as the only solution to solving problems in their life, not using them to help them achieve life goals that aren't relevant to psychedelics, like financial success or these kinds of things, building a family, these kinds of things. And so then it's really just about picking the psychedelic back up to look back and to use them as for the tool that they are, kind of in an ongoing basis. This is generally kind of the wise elder phase of using psychedelics, if I was going to kind of broadly generalize it here. And, you know, I don't know what's after this, to be honest. So this is the furthest I've seen people go with it. Maybe there's other phases you go through as you keep dancing with the medicine. I don't really know, but this is what I've seen people go through. So let me just kind of wrap this up. We'll summarize this here a little bit, and then we'll call it done. So just to summarize really quick here, like I said, these are just kind of broad phases I've observed that people go through, that I've gone through a bunch myself. When it comes to kind of prolonged overtime use of psychedelics, right? So just to remind you what those are, generally the first phase is going to be some form of deconditioning experience where we're kind of having all our kind of assumptions challenged about what we believe and what we think and what we identify with and what we don't. There's a lot of kind of sifting and sorting through stuff. That often kind of ends up moving people into more of a direct experiencing of experiences with psychedelics, whether those are insights and epiphanies or spiritual experiences or, you know, energy work or that kind of a thing. That tends to often move into a phase of zealotry where people get really certain about what psychedelics are, what they aren't, and, you know, what this means in terms of the cosmos and reality, this kind of a thing. That often moves into kind of, you know, if people graduate past that, into a phase of kind of stasis or like an ongoing working that's just about your relationship with the psychedelic. It's much more humble. It's much more just using the tool for what it is. Often that's nice for a while. Then reality creeps in. There's some sort of challenge, some sort of hard truth to grapple with, or life event or series of changes in life that kind of create a fork in the road, essentially. And that fork in the road is either we kind of move towards an obstacle, you know, whether that's just, you know, growing past using psychedelics or some situation that requires us to stop using them, or towards kind of getting bitter and jaded and disappointed and kind of disillusioned, right? If people kind of ride out either of those phases for a while, sometimes some of them will reclaim their relationship to psychedelics on the other side for the tool that they are, and stop, you know, using them in ways that are so much about projection and much more about appreciating the benefits that psychedelics can bring. And that pretty much sums up the video. So yeah, this is what I've seen over time. And I thought I would just share this because, again, this is the kind of thing that, you know, not everyone's used psychedelics over a long period of time or known a lot of other people who have. Not everyone's willing to talk about this kind of thing. You know, people may not agree with this. I'd be curious to hear your input. Did this resonate for you? Can you relate to this? Have you seen people go through these phases yourself? Have you been through these phases yourself? Did something I say kind of hit home for you? Leave a comment down below. I'd really, you know, appreciate that. I'd really, you know, I love dialogue around these topics. And in general, you know, I wish you well. And if you're new to psychedelics and you've been curious about what the big picture is, hopefully this kind of gives you at least one view. It may not be the truth, but it's at least one perspective on kind of what you might have to look forward to with your experiences with it. I think we're going to wrap there. So thanks for watching. Much love to you all. I really appreciate you guys, and it's always an honor to do these videos for you. So take care. I have more content on the way for you soon, and I hope you're doing well out there.